In the name of Allah, the Merciful and the Gracious. Many of us have heard more than once that Hajj is a gift from Allah, but not everyone can receive it. Hajj, the pilgrimage to the holy places, is the fifth pillar of Islam and is obligatory for all Muslims who are able to perform it. And whoever performs it correctly will receive full atonement for all his sins and return home clean as a baby. This is what our doctrine says. And whose example, if not that of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, should serve as a law for any Muslim to perform an impeccable Hajj. The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, performed only one Hajj in his life after the migration, the Hajj of farewell. At Mount Arafat, he delivered a historic sermon to the believers, which was called the farewell sermon. It was in this famous speech that the Prophet set up the final tradition of Hajj. According to historians, 124,000 people witnessed that event. Reason well, therefore, O people, and understand the words which I convey to you. I leave behind me two things, the Quran and my example, the Sunnah, and if you follow these, you will never go astray. These were his words in that farewell sermon. As no caravan can do without a leader and a guide, so the leader of the pilgrim caravan is the seal of all the prophets, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And the guide is his sunnah and his example. Islam is the teaching of all the prophets and messengers, peace be upon them all. And the aim of all worship is to achieve the pleasure of Allah and to ask Him to forgive sins and grant a good fate. Therefore, anyone who goes to Mecca to perform Hajj should first of all know how the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, did it. Is this right? Dear brothers and sisters, we do not add a word from ourselves. Everyone knows what we are talking about today. Today's conference is not only a need for us, the descendants, to return the historical truth, it is also a cleansing of Islam from those tares and substitutes which were introduced into Islam by the infidels who betrayed the Prophet in favor of their megalomania and insatiable thirst for power. Praise be to Allah that we have the opportunity today to speak the truth about all that breaks our bond with Allah Almighty and alienates us from the Prophet. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. The Prophet performed the God-pleasing impeccable Hajj by strictly observing the correctness of all the rituals that have been established since the dawn of time. This included tawaf, the most recognizable of all the rituals of Hajj. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, performed tawaf in a clockwise direction, exactly as this ritual had been performed since ancient times. This is confirmed by the fundamental study of Orientalist Arabist Oleg Bolshakov, The History of the Caliphate, which states that the ritual of worshipping Kaaba involved a sevenfold clockwise circumambulation, tawaf, and touching the sacred stones with the hand. This is also confirmed by the authors of the book The Life of Muhammad by Panova and Vakhtin, which describes the ritual of tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba from the time of the prophets, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, childhood, based on a study of historical sources. I will quote, "After this began a ceremony of sevenfold circumambulation around the Kaaba, imitating, as some researchers believe, the motion of the seven then known planets of the solar system. For some reason, however, the Kaaba was circumambulating against the motion of the planets. But the direction of the circumambulation of the Kaaba, as the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, did, was changed during the reign of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. He was the first who, when he came there, said, 'We will not go clockwise. That's the way the pagans walk. They've been walking there for a long time. were not going the way the Prophet walked. He was wrong. Dear brothers and sisters, just think about it. Did the great Prophet himself, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, make a mistake? The most beloved of the prophets of the Most High, through whom Allah himself spoke and instructed him in his every step, making his life an example for us. How could he be wrong? Muslims, who are we listening to? But the fact remains that since then, the Ummah has been going round the Kaaba in the counterclockwise direction. But the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, as the sources testify, circumvented the Kaaba in a clockwise direction and did not change Tawaf. If this had happened, would there have been no revelation or other evidence of this important ritual? The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, forbade the innovations so that there would be no distortion of the truth. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said, "He who innovates things in our affairs for which there is no valid reason commits sin, and these are to be rejected." But according to Ummah, the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was wrong. Then what? Did Ummah consider the great Prophet himself, the favorite of Allah, to be a pagan? Who are we following, Muslims? The leader of the pilgrim caravan, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was replaced by a liar, a Judean appointee who betrayed the Prophet. A serious and terrible substitution took place, and we followed the shaitan instead of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. To reject this truth, dear brothers and sisters, is to reject the Prophet and Allah. It means admitting in the face of the Prophet and Allah that you are devoted to a polytheist, that you are the slave of shaitan. There is no other way, because that is the truth. Of course, when a Judean and polytheist, Ummah, introduced this innovation, there were those of our ancestors who resented it, but their resentment was brutally suppressed, as it has always been. People can always be intimidated, killed, starved, or sent to war. Ummah's set of methods for suppressing the true followers of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was standard and very effective. Then, most of the Ummah remained silent and obeyed when Ummah, a Judean and polytheist, committed this grandiose substitution in the most important ritual of Hajj. We're still reaping the consequences of this confrontation between shaitan and Allah himself. The right-hand drive is fundamental to the acceptance of Hajj of a pilgrim by Allah Almighty. The disbelievers will say, does it make any difference which side to go around the Kaaba? Is it so important which way to perform tawaf? Then tell me, how unconditional is it for you to go after the Prophet or against him? The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was a messenger of Allah Almighty himself. Could he be mistaken about the correct way to circumambulate the Kaaba? He knew very well the true meaning of going around the Kaaba from the right side, because going clockwise is the direction of spiritual growth, unity, and the attainment of perfect morality. This is the direction towards creation, towards unity, for the satisfaction of the Creator, while the counterclockwise movement is, on the contrary, the direction towards separation, destruction, domination, striving for power, and the activation in man the thirst for material possession, consumerism, at the instigation of shaitan. What justifications are we now being given to justify the left-hand traffic around the Kaaba? And whose justifications exactly are they? Can you say? Who came up with these justifications in the first place? And what are the justifications? For example, that the planet moves counterclockwise, or by the fact that the blood in the body also moves counterclockwise. Then, a reasonable question arises: from what side one must look at the direction of blood movements for it to move counterclockwise? From above or from below? From the front or from behind? From the right or from the left? Ask any competent doctor who will tell you that blood moves from inside out, from the heart to the periphery, to all organs and tissues, and back to the heart. So are the arguments that these people make out of ignorance justified? The changing of the direction of travel around the Kaaba by Umar was no accident, and he is not the only one in history to have done so. A similar thing happened in Christianity, particularly in Orthodoxy. For in Orthodoxy, originating from Andrew the First called, the first apostle and the most faithful disciple of Isa, traditionally, the circumambulation around the temple was done clockwise, although Catholics have long walked counterclockwise, and Orthodoxy held on for a very long time. However, in Russia in the 17th century, Patriarch Nikon carried out a church reform and changed the direction of circumambulation of churches and altars counterclockwise. This is a time history will call a schism, when outraged believers refuse to comply with this innovation. And just as in their time, the followers of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, the indignant Christians were also persecuted and killed. As we can see, the technology of substituting and distorting the teachings of the prophets, peace be upon them, has not changed. In Islam and in Christianity, the true essence of this most important rite of circumventing the holy places, which is essential for the spiritual development of man and society as a whole, has been substituted. There is only one explanation for all these so-called reforms. Left-handed counterclockwise movement was originally inherent in the religion of Judaism. There is a detailed description of the circumambulation ritual. When a Kohen circumambulating the Mizbah, he would start from the south side and go to the east side, and from the east side, he would go to the north side, that is, counterclockwise. There is also the fact that on the seventh day of Sukkot, the Judeans circumambulated the altar counterclockwise 7 times. Now, this circumambulation of the altar has been replaced by the same left-handed sevenfold circumambulation around the Torah scroll, or elevation in the center of the synagogue from which the Torah is read. Rabbi Yosef Karo decreed in the Shulchan Aruch Right Code that circles should be made only counterclockwise. Let us think about what happens to the physics of the energies of the huge mass of people moving counterclockwise. This directly contributes to the animal component of man, his nafs. The answer becomes clear when we look at the world today, which is dominated by division, indifference, aggression, and intolerance to others. We should not forget that the place where the Kaaba is located is a place of great power. And if we did tawaf the way the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, did, then we would have had much more opportunities to strengthen the spiritual forces, to obtain paradise, to beautify and build up our world for the sake of Allah's pleasure. Again, the disbelievers may say, what does it matter whether one goes clockwise or anti-clockwise around the Kaaba? What does it matter how the sun rises and sets? And if you swept these things around, would it make a big difference? A simple question. It would. You know, what would change? We will be gone when the sun starts to rise from the west. Think of this reference as one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. Allah forbid it to come true. Everyone who performs Hajj should be inspired and have faith, and perform Hajj the way the Prophet performed it. But what happens in reality? Every year, we see how many pilgrims are trampled during Hajj. This only proves what shaitan has done to us. We, Muslims, are now trampling each other while performing left-handed Hajj. Imagine, a fallen Muslim gets no help from his brothers. We are like animals. Wake up, Muslims. Every year, when we perform Hajj, we trample Muslims who fall, stumble, are exhausted like animals, going against the Prophet. This is all because to this day, we continue to walk in the footsteps of a Judean, a polytheist Ummah, against the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him himself. We, Muslims, continue to walk against the Prophet, trampling on the living Muslims walking on the corpses of our brothers. But if we had followed the Prophet like we should, we would have remained human, and we would have picked up every brother who stumbled, and we would have carried every weakened one in our arms, preserving his life. For the life of every Muslim, for a true Muslim, a follower of the Prophet is as precious as his own. And now we're trampling each other like a herd of sheep, like animals. This is the way shaitan has made us. Would true Muslims do that? No. If you stumbled, true brothers would carry you in their arms, filling your heart with love, not fear of being trampled on if you stumbled. These polytheists try to console us by saying that he whom we trample on while performing Hajj will go straight to paradise. Paradise? By going against the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, himself? Would we not be ashamed to look into his suffering eyes? What is it like for the Prophet to see the whole Ummah going against him every time, led by polytheists? So many times the Prophet warned us, do not follow Umar, but the Ummah followed him. This is the facts, this is our history. Our ancestors knew all this, but they continued on the path of shaitan. And every one of them who performed this anti-Hajj took this sin upon himself. And he put it not only on himself, but also on our shoulders, on the shoulders of his descendants. But we have a chance to put things right, to save our ancestors, ourselves, and future generations. And now, we bring to your attention an expert from a video interview with the respected Aidar Harudinov, a candidate of philosophical sciences, Islamic scholar, teacher, historian, and author of books, who will tell us about the true meaning of Hajj.
Assalamu alaikum. I welcome all conference participants and viewers. People often ask a question about Hajj. What is it? Hajj is, as we know, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. But in fact, Hajj and all its stages, all its rituals, symbolize the stages of spiritual growth, and precisely the spiritual experience the spirit has to go through on its way to the connection with God, with its Creator. Kissing the black stone is just a symbol of how the spirit connects with its Creator. The circumambulation of the Kaaba, the running between the hills of Safa and Marwa, the stoning of shaitan, the standing on Mount Arafat, all this symbolizes certain important stages, the turning points in a person's spiritual development. Unfortunately, it so happened that ritualism took over. The spiritual component has been disguised and is not even talked about. They don't talk about the fact that Hajj is an earthly model of spiritual development. It is difficult to talk about spiritual development. These are invisible matters, after all. Hajj was given as an instruction, and if the meaning of Hajj rituals had been properly explained to Muslims as a reflection of spiritual development, everything would have been correct, and everything would have worked. But Hajj is not being presented this way. It is completely earthbound. It has been turned into a ritual that is even devoid of spiritual content. That's why people who can afford it perform Hajj every year, although it would be enough to perform it just once in a lifetime. But the most interesting thing is that Hajj is actually performed only spiritually. If Hajj is not performed spiritually, that is, if the spirit does not reach Allah, then even if you perform 1,000 earthly Hajjs, it will be useless. Moreover, even in its earthly version, Hajj is somewhat distorted, notably at the most serious point. It is the rite that is called tawaf, which is performed counterclockwise nowadays. Although in the time of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, it was performed clockwise, and even before the birth of Islam, before his prophetic mission, and even the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, when he himself performed his only Hajj, performed tawaf in a clockwise direction. We should think about why this movement is being done in the opposite direction nowadays. This is a very serious point, and Muslims should think about it seriously. Because if Hajj is an earthly model of what should happen spiritually, and even this earthly model has been distorted, then accordingly, walking counterclockwise around the Kaaba doesn't work in a positive way. It may even work in a negative way, especially since there are certain authorities that ensure that people move counterclockwise. Try to go clockwise and you will be stopped. Still, I will say that Hajj should be performed spiritually. It is a journey of the spirit towards its creator. And even if a person doesn't have the opportunity to perform Hajj the way it exists now, Allah hasn't deprived him of the opportunity to perform a spiritual Hajj without even leaving one's own home. Everything is available for this. All the conditions have been created. All the information has been provided. And the truth has been separated from the lies. As the Quran says, it is up to each person to simply weigh up on the scales of his heart the truth and the lies, and choose the truth, because when a person acts from his heart, he doesn't make mistakes.
Thank you very much, dear Aidar Khairuddinov. I completely agreed with you that Hajj is a journey of the spirit to its creator, to Allah. So, does it matter whether we go in the direction of the Prophet's movement or against it? Do you remember the true essence of Hajj, which the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, reminded us of? Or is Hajj just a tourist trip for us, which not every Muslim can afford today? No, Hajj is not a tourist trip. It is an experience. It is an initiation into the great history of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and the shrines of Islam. Hajj should unite Muslims because Islam gives great importance to brotherhood and friendship within the Ummah. But there is something else I wanted to say about the economic side of Hajj. There should be no privileges in the organization of the pilgrimage, in the observance of the rituals of Hajj, regardless of one's social status. There was a time when the Kaaba was relatively accessible to ordinary believers, and even the doors of the temple were opened, albeit rarely. And today, what is it? Today, the worshippers, if they are lucky enough to squeeze through, can only approach the black cube of the Kaaba. But entering the interior of Baytullah has become accessible only to the very rich, higher-ranking individuals or heads of states. They are apparently the closest to Allah. Shouldn't all pilgrims be treated equally as a reminder that all are equal before the Almighty? And what would our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say about today's Hajj quotas? It is no secret to any of us that the Hajj quota system is often a corruption and great scheme in the Hajj industry. And very often it happens that pilgrims are left cheated. The quota system itself will always remain a lucrative business because our esteemed theologians have forgotten to explain to us that the fiqh books nowhere stipulate a specific time for Hajj as its obligatory fard condition. These include only three things: wearing ihram, standing on Mount Arafat, and making circumambulation tawaf around the Kaaba. Historically, Hajj is performed in the month of Zulhijjah. For its time, the gathering of pilgrims at one time was quite justified and even necessary. The thing is that in those distant times, Hajj was available to very few believers. And if pilgrims had reached Mecca at different times, Hajj would not have created one of the climaxes of Hajj, the sense of the Day of Judgment, which is symbolized by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims gathered together and dressed in white shrouds of Ihram because of the small number of believers. As a consequence, Hajj quotas will continue to exist as long as we are persuaded that Hajj can only be performed on certain days of the month of Zulhijjah. Why do the theologians, whom we listen to and trust, keep silent about the truth and do not explain the principles of fiqh? So they create Hajj problems out of nothing: crushes, trampling of believers, quotas, inflated prices, thousands of deceived people, and millions deprived of the happiness of joining the spiritual shrines of Islam. In fact, today, Hajj has become elitist, as we hear from some muftis. Hajj is not for the poor. Is this Islam? Is this the Sunnah of the Prophet? We have turned every Muslim's sacred duty into a business that has no analogy. Hajj has become a huge business, a very lucrative business. We don't have to worry about competition, improving quality, or coming up with something new and original. This business has huge prospects for growth, because no matter how many new hotels are built in Mecca, there will always be demand for them. With every new believer born, there is one more customer. Demand and the influx of new clients is always guaranteed, so we can set any price, justifying the increase of the lack of places due to quotas that we ourselves introduce. And you are not ashamed to look in the mirror? What do you see in the mirror? A follower of the Prophet, a Muslim, or an angry slave of shaitan selling the sacred? Aren't you afraid to face our beloved Prophet in reality, let alone Allah Himself? And what would the Prophet say when he found out that some Muslims have privatized the holy place and are exploiting others, deciding who can approach it and who cannot, dividing into rich and poor? The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, forbade usury. And that is exactly what we're doing now. Only, we don't call it that outright. We're chasing profit rather than honor and conscience. They have established a trade in God on Hajj, in mosques. Who makes money on this? Think about it. We're told if you visited Mecca, performed Hajj, you are forgiven for your sins. But you have committed tawaf against the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, acting as a polytheist. So what do we hope for? Do you think that Allah will see us when we die? No. In such a scenario, we will not be greeted by Allah, but by shaitan, because we have trampled the footprints of the Prophet and followed in the footsteps of a polytheist, a slave of Yahweh. Dear brothers and sisters, we are worshipping and loving Allah Muslims, not slaves of Yahweh. And let the journey of our return to true Islam begin right now. For a start, share this information with our other brothers and sisters. What kind of Muslims are we if we remain silent and go against our Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him? The real Hajj is the true way home to Allah Almighty. We need to return this home to us. Every Muslim who is faithful to the Prophet must bring the message. This is the true Hajj, the true way home. And may Allah have mercy on us all.